Commander Dax stepped onto the transport ship, his boots clicking softly against the polished metal floor. The ship, Silver Star, was heading to Nova Prime, a bustling trade hub in the galactic core. After months on the battlefield, this journey was his first moment of peace. He adjusted his uniform, the fabric still carrying the scent of war, burnt ozone, and steel. Dax didn't care much for luxury, but after everything he had endured, a first-class seat was a rare privilege. His superior officer had arranged it as a small reward for his bravery in the last battle. He didn't argue. A little comfort before the next mission wouldn't hurt. As he reached his assigned seat, he paused. Someone was already sitting there. A woman, dressed in expensive fabrics with golden embroidery, lounged in the chair as if she owned it. Her posture radiated entitlement. She held a crystal glass filled with shimmering blue liquid, taking slow sips while looking at her holographic communicator. Dax remained calm. He had faced far worse than an arrogant civilian. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said politely. "I believe this is my seat." The woman didn't even look up. She waved a hand dismissively. "There must be a mistake. This seat is taken." Dax's jaw tightened. "There's no mistake. Seat 3A is mine." He pulled out his digital ticket and projected the holographic confirmation. The woman glanced at it, rolling her eyes. "You must be joking. Do you really think a soldier belongs in first class?" She let out a mocking laugh. "You should be in the back with the rest of your kind." A few passengers turned to watch the exchange. Some wore expressions of amusement, others of discomfort. No one spoke up. Dax took a deep breath. He wasn't here to fight. "Ma'am, I don't want trouble. I just want my seat." The woman leaned back, completely unfazed. "Then find another one. Surely someone like you is used to discomfort." Dax clenched his fists but stayed calm and controlled. He had faced enemies twice his size, creatures that could crush a human with a single blow. This woman was nothing compared to that. Before he could respond, a deep voice echoed from behind. "You might want to rethink that decision." Silence spread through the cabin. The authority in the voice was undeniable. Dax turned his head slowly. The woman, who had been so confident moments ago, froze. Her face paled. Dax's eyes widened as he realized who had spoken. A deep silence filled the cabin. Every passenger's gaze shifted toward the source of the voice. Even the ship's low hum seemed quieter, as if the vessel itself was waiting for what would happen next. Commander Dax turned slowly, his military instincts kicking in. The man standing behind him was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a dark uniform with golden insignias on his chest. His piercing silver eyes locked onto the woman in Dax's seat. The woman, who had been full of arrogance moments ago, stiffened. She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the stem of her crystal glass. The man took a single step forward. Every movement carried power. The air around him felt heavier, as if gravity itself respected his presence. "Perhaps," the man continued, his voice smooth but unmistakably dangerous, "you didn't hear the soldier clearly. That seat belongs to him." Murmurs spread through the cabin. Passengers leaned in, whispering among themselves. Who was this man? The woman forced a smile, though it wavered. I didn't mean any disrespect, General," she stammered. "General." The word sent a ripple through the crowd. Dax's mind worked fast. There was only one person with that kind of authority and presence. General Kale Veros, a legend among the Terran Dominion. The man responsible for leading humanity's fleets against the Zephyr invasion. He had won battles when others thought them lost. Dax had never met him in person, but he had heard the stories. Ruthless in war, disciplined in command, and absolutely unforgiving toward injustice. "Then you won't mind standing," General Veros said, his voice cold. The woman hesitated, her pride clashing with her fear. "Surely, this isn't necessary." "It is," Veros interrupted. He didn't raise his voice, yet it carried the weight of command. "You refused a soldier what was rightfully his. A soldier who fights so you can enjoy your luxuries without worry. Now, get up. The woman's face turned red, whether from anger or embarrassment. No one could tell. Slowly, she stood, stepping aside. Dax watched the exchange with quiet respect. He had handled countless battlefield conflicts. But this was a different kind of war. One fought with words, power, and unshakable presence. Veros turned to Dax. "Take your seat, Commander." Dax nodded. "Thank you, sir." He sat down, adjusting his uniform. Veros looked back at the woman. "You may find another seat or take the next flight. The choice is yours." The woman glared at Dax as if this was somehow his fault, but she said nothing. She turned sharply and walked toward the back of the cabin, her expensive dress swishing behind her. The tension in the air eased, and passengers began murmuring again. Some nodded in approval, others simply returned to their own business. Dax exhaled slowly. He wasn't one for unnecessary conflicts, but seeing justice served so swiftly was a rare thing. Before he could fully settle in, General Veros lowered himself into the seat beside him. Dax turned, confused. "Sir." Veros gave him a slight smirk. "I figured you could use some company, Commander." Dax's mind raced. Why would a general, a living legend, choose to sit beside him? Something bigger was happening here, and he was about to find out what. Commander Dax sat stiffly in his seat, acutely aware of the man beside him. General Kale Veros, the hero of the Zyphar War, the man who had commanded fleets that shattered entire enemy armadas, was sitting next to him. This wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. Dax glanced at the general, who sat with perfect posture, his expression unreadable. The air around him carried weight, the kind of presence that made men stand straighter and choose their words carefully. For a few moments, neither spoke. The ship's engines hummed as it began its ascent into orbit. Passengers settled in, murmuring about the earlier scene, casting curious glances at Dax and the general. Dax finally cleared his throat. "Sir, I didn't expect to see you on a civilian transport." Veros turned his head slightly, amusement flickering in his sharp silver eyes. "Neither did I." Plans change. That wasn't an answer. That was a test. Dax had spent years under military command. He knew when someone was gauging his intelligence, his awareness. He chose his next words carefully. "You weren't on the passenger list." Veros's smirk grew slightly. "You checked." Dax gave a short nod. "Standard habit. Always know who's in your surroundings." The general chuckled. A rare sound from a man like him. "Good. That kind of awareness keeps soldiers alive." He paused, then leaned back in his seat. "Tell me, Commander, what do you think of what just happened?" Dax exhaled, thinking. She assumed she had more power than she actually did. Entitlement without strength to back it up is meaningless. Veros nodded approvingly. "And what would you have done if I hadn't stepped in?" Dax hesitated. "I would have handled it, sir, respectfully, but I wouldn't have let it slide." "Interesting," Veros mused. "Some soldiers would have walked away to avoid conflict. Others would have escalated the situation into something regrettable." He turned slightly toward Dax, his gaze piercing. "You, however, measured your response. That's rare." Dax wasn't sure how to respond. Was this conversation leading somewhere? Before he could ask, the ship shuddered. The lights flickered for a brief moment. Dax's instincts flared. Something wasn't right. He glanced around. Passengers didn't seem alarmed, but Veros' expression had shifted. A moment later, the pilot's voice crackled through the speakers. "Attention, passengers. We are experiencing an unexpected course adjustment. Please remain seated." Dax's gut tightened. Course adjustment. On a pre-planned commercial route. That didn't happen without a serious reason. He turned to Veros. "Sir, was that supposed to happen?" Veros's jaw tightened. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his uniform pocket and tapped a small, discreet holo device. A faint blue light flickered on, showing a secure military channel. Dax caught a glimpse of a red warning symbol. Veros's voice was low, calm, but there was an edge to it. "I need you to stay alert, Commander." Dax's pulse quickened. The general wasn't just here by chance. Something was happening. Something big. And now, Dax was caught right in the middle of it. Commander Dax's grip tightened on the armrest as the ship shuddered again. Something was wrong. Civilian transports didn't change course without warning, and they certainly didn't shake like this unless there was trouble. General Veros kept his expression neutral, but Dax noticed how his fingers subtly tapped against his knee, a soldier's silent habit, counting time, measuring risk. The overhead lights flickered once more. Then, a voice crackled over the intercom, this time not the pilot's. "Attention, passengers. This ship is now under our control. Do not attempt to resist." The cabin fell silent. Dax's heart pounded as he scanned the room. Pirates, hijackers, rebels? He had seen enough war to know that whoever was behind this wouldn't hesitate to kill. The woman who had refused him his seat let out a small, horrified gasp. Suddenly, social status didn't matter anymore. Veros exhaled slowly, his expression still unreadable. "Well," he murmured, "that confirms it." Dax turned to him sharply. "Confirms what, sir?" Veros didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat, retrieving a small, sleek data chip. He held it up to the dim light, watching it reflect. "I was carrying sensitive intelligence," he admitted, "something certain people would kill for." He gave Dax a sidelong glance. "Looks like they decided to take a more direct approach." Dax felt a cold realization settle in his stomach. This wasn't a random hijacking. The enemy wasn't here for the passengers. They were here for Veros. The ship's doors at the far end of the cabin hissed open, and 4 figures in armored suits strode in. Their helmets were sleek, their weapons compact but deadly. Mercenaries, not common thugs. These were professionals. One of them, a tall figure with a scared visor, stepped forward. His voice came through a voice modulator, deep and emotionless. "We know you're here, General," the mercenary said, scanning the crowd. "Make this easy. Surrender, and we let everyone live." Passengers cowered in their seats, wide-eyed and frozen in fear. Dax's muscles tensed. His mind raced. He had no weapons, none that were visible, at least. But Veros hadn't moved. The general sat there, completely calm, as if they weren't staring down armed killers. Dax's pulse pounded. If Veros was waiting for the right moment to act, he needed to be ready. The mercenary took another step forward. "I won't ask twice, General. Come with us." Veros finally moved. Fast. In one fluid motion, he pulled something from his sleeve, a thin metallic device, and flicked it toward the mercenary. A sharp crack echoed through the cabin as the device exploded in a burst of light and sound. A flashbang. The mercenaries staggered back, their visors flickering with static. Dax didn't hesitate. Years of battlefield instincts kicked in. He surged forward, grabbing the nearest mercenary's rifle and jerking it downward, slamming an elbow into the man's visor. The mercenary stumbled, and Dax wrenched the weapon from his hands. Veros was already moving, taking down another mercenary with a precise strike to the throat. The hijacker choked. Fell. The passengers screamed, ducking low. The remaining 2 mercenaries recovered fast, raising their weapons. Dax dived behind a seat, narrowly dodging a burst of red plasma fire. The heat singed the air where he had stood a second before. Veros grabbed a fallen mercenary's sidearm, turned, and fired once. A clean, controlled shot, straight through the 3rd mercenary's visor. The last hijacker hesitated, suddenly realizing who he was dealing with. He took a step back, gun wavering. Veros straightened, his silver eyes locked onto the mercenary. "You have 2 choices," he said, voice like steel. "Drop the weapon and live." The mercenary fired. Veros was faster. He sidestepped, a blur of motion, and returned fire. One shot, straight to the chest. The mercenary collapsed. Silence. Dax exhaled, his heart still hammering. Around them, passengers stared in stunned horror and awe. The woman who had refused Dax's seat earlier was pale, gripping the seat in front of her. Veros calmly holstered the stolen sidearm. "Well," he said, unshaken, "that was sloppy. I expected more of a challenge." Dax let out a breath, shaking his head. "With all due respect, sir, I think we just made their day a lot harder." Veros smirked. "And it's only going to get worse for them. Because this wasn't over yet." The hijackers had backup, and they were already boarding the ship. Dax barely had time to catch his breath before the ship lurched violently. Overhead panels flickered, and a low, ominous thud echoed through the hull. Veros' expression turned ice-cold. "They're breaching the cargo bay." Dax cursed under his breath. That meant more mercenaries, better equipped and expecting resistance. Passengers whimpered in fear. The woman who had refused Dax's seat earlier clutched the armrest, her knuckles white. For the first time, she looked at him not with arrogance, but with desperate hope. Dax checked the plasma rifle he had taken from the first mercenary. "Sir, we need to get these civilians somewhere safe." Veros gave him a sharp nod. "Agreed. But first, we need to secure the bridge. If they take control of the ship, we're all dead." A sharp hiss came from the rear of the cabin. The emergency exit doors groaned as something latched onto the hull. Dax's stomach twisted. He had seen this tactic before, boarding drills. Veros turned toward the passengers. "Listen carefully, get to the forward cabins, and lock the doors behind you. Do not open them unless you hear my voice." No one argued. They scrambled to their feet and rushed toward the front, some helping the elderly and children. Even the entitled woman who had mocked Dax earlier didn't hesitate. Fear erased pride. Dax and Veros turned toward the rear just as the hull gave way. A circular section of the wall melted, glowing white-hot, before it was ripped outward. Then they came. 5 figures in reinforced combat armor, weapons raised. These weren't the same mercenaries as before. Their armor was bulkier, reinforced with kinetic shielding. Their movements were precise, tactical. Elites. Dax raised his rifle. They'd brought professionals. Veros' lips curled into a faint smirk. So did we. The firefight erupted instantly. A mercenary fired. Dax ducked, rolling behind a seat as red plasma scorched past him. He fired back. A short burst, but their armor absorbed the shots. "Shields," he growled. "This'll take more than just good aim." Veros had already moved, fast as a shadow, closing the distance between him and the nearest mercenary. One precise shot to the knee joint, and the mercenary collapsed. Dax saw his opening. He pivoted, fired a single shot straight through the exposed visor of another mercenary. The man dropped instantly. The remaining 3 took cover, adjusting tactics. One tossed a shock grenade, a small metallic sphere that hissed and pulsed blue. Dax lunged, kicking the grenade midair, sending it flying back toward them. Boom! A bright concussive blast sent 2 mercenaries sprawling. Their shields flickered, overloaded. Veros seized the moment. He rushed forward, grabbing one by the collar and slamming him into the bulkhead with brutal force. The mercenary slumped, unconscious. The last soldier tried to run. Veros didn't let him. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisted, a sickening snap. The mercenary screamed, dropping his rifle. Veros slammed his fist into the man's helmet, sending him crashing to the floor. Silence. Dax exhaled, his heart hammering. The cabin smelled of burnt metal and ozone. Veros stepped over a fallen mercenary, his voice eerily calm. "They underestimated us." Dax shook his head. "They won't make that mistake again." Before Veros could reply, a sharp beep echoed from one of the fallen mercenaries. Dax's eyes snapped to the source, a small device attached to the soldier's wrist. A transmission. The hacked intercom crackled to life once more. "Impressive," a new voice said. Cold, amused. Dangerous. I expected resistance, but I didn't expect you, General Veros. Dax felt the air shift. This was the real enemy, the one pulling the strings. Veros remained still. Who are you? A dark chuckle. A messenger. But you may call me Commander Ragos. The name sent a jolt through Dax's memory. Ragos, former Zyphar warlord, thought to be dead. Your death was greatly exaggerated, Veros said dryly. Ragos chuckled again. I could say the same for you, General. But enough talk. You have something I want. Dax's eyes flickered to the data chip still secured in Veros's grip. That was their real target. Veros's jaw tightened. You won't get it. Oh, but I will, Ragos said smoothly. You see, I don't just have mercenaries. A sudden screech of metal echoed through the ship. Dax felt the deck tilt slightly. Ragos's voice was laced with satisfaction. I have control of the ship. The ship lurched violently, sending sparks raining from the overhead lights. Dax grabbed the nearest seat for balance, his mind racing. They had lost control of the ship. General Veros stayed eerily calm, his silver eyes narrowing. Ragos, if you think you can pilot this ship remotely, you're making a mistake. The intercom crackled again, Ragos's voice thick with amusement. Oh, General, this ship isn't yours anymore. A sharp whine of engines roared through the hull. Dax felt the subtle shift of artificial gravity struggling to compensate. Ragos was steering them somewhere. Veros exhaled slowly, then turned to Dax. We need to get to the bridge. Now. Dax nodded, his grip tightening on the plasma rifle. They had to move before the enemy locked them out completely. But as they turned toward the corridor, the emergency doors slammed shut. Thick security barriers hissed into place, cutting off access to the bridge. Ragos's voice oozed confidence. You're thinking too small, Veros. You still believe you're in control. A pause. Then, almost gleefully, I own this ship. Dax cursed under his breath. He's sealing us in. Veros's jaw clenched. No, he's stalling us. Dax realized the truth instantly. More enemies were coming. And they didn't have much time. The plan. Veros turned toward the emergency panel on the wall. A secure maintenance system, linked to ship controls. It wouldn't be as strong as the bridge's main console, but Dax caught on. You think you can override the lockdown. Veros already had a small multi-tool in his hands, working on the panel. I don't think. I know. Dax turned his attention toward the sealed entrance, listening carefully. Footsteps, several of them. The next wave of mercenaries was already moving in. His grip on the rifle tightened. They had seconds. The emergency panel sparked as Veros bypassed the encryption. The screen flickered, then blinked green. Got it, Veros murmured. A single section of the bulkhead hissed open. Not the bridge doors, but a maintenance shaft. Dax's stomach twisted. Crawling through a confined space with an enemy on board was a nightmare scenario. But it was their only option. Veros gestured toward the opening. Go. I'll follow. Dax didn't hesitate. He slung the rifle across his back, swung into the tight, dimly lit passage, and began moving. Fast. Behind him, Veros climbed in and sealed the hatch just as heavy boots reached the cabin. They could hear the muffled shouts of mercenaries. Where are they? They were here a second ago. They couldn't have just disappeared. Dax kept moving, heart pounding. For now they had the advantage, but Ragos wasn't stupid. He would figure out where they were headed. And when he did, he would be waiting. The chase begins. The maintenance shaft was barely wide enough for them to crawl. The hum of the ship's systems vibrated through the metal walls. Dax moved fast, checking the navigation markers on the inner panels. They were 3 levels away from the bridge. Veros spoke quietly behind him. Ragos will try to force us out of here. Dax didn't need the reminder. Yeah, I know. As if on cue, the entire shaft trembled. A sudden gust of pressurized air shot through the tunnel, nearly knocking Dax off balance. Ragos's voice rang through unseen speakers. "Clever. You must be desperate if you're crawling through the walls like vermin." Dax gritted his teeth, pressing forward. "Ignore him. Keep moving." "You know," Ragos continued, "I could just vent this shaft into space." A warning alarm blared. Dax's pulse spiked. He knew Ragos wasn't bluffing. If he triggered the decompression systems, they'd be sucked out in seconds. "Move," Veros ordered. Dax pushed himself harder, his arms burning. The shaft angled downward toward an access panel leading to the next deck. He reached it, slammed his palm against the emergency release. Nothing. Locked. Dax swore under his breath. "It's disabled from the main controls." Behind him, Veros didn't stop moving. "Step aside." Dax pressed against the wall as Veros pulled a small, sharp device from his sleeve. A micro-welder. He pressed it to the panel's lock, and a thin blue flame melted through the mechanism. A loud hiss, then the door popped open. Dax kicked it out, pulling himself through. The moment Veros followed, the ship jerked violently again. They were moving faster. Dax steadied himself. "He's taking us somewhere." Veros nodded grimly. "We're not heading toward a station. We're heading toward deep space." Dax's blood ran cold. "He's planning to dump us where no one can find us." Ragos's voice returned, smooth and mocking. "You're quick, I'll give you that. But it's over, General. You're on my ship now." Veros smirked. "Are we?" Before Ragos could respond, Veros tapped his holo-device. A quiet ping echoed from the console beside them. A single message flashed on the screen. Greater than coincidental, Pion stabilization. External fleet link. Online. Dax's breath caught. Someone was coming. Veros finally allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. "You made one mistake, Ragos." A pause. Then, "And what's that?" Veros's silver eyes burned with quiet triumph. "You hijacked the wrong damn ship." The ship's engines roared, pushing them deeper into the void. Dax gripped a nearby railing as artificial gravity struggled to adjust. Veros's message had been sent. Help was coming. But the question remained, would they arrive in time? Ragos's voice returned, his amusement fading into frustration. "I admit, General, I underestimated you. But it doesn't matter. Your fate is sealed." Dax exhaled sharply. "He sounds nervous." Veros smirked. "He should be." Dax glanced at the flickering display panel beside them. "But he still has control of the ship. We need to reach the bridge before your backup gets here." Veros nodded. "Then we take the fastest route. Through them." Dax followed his gaze. Down the corridor, a security checkpoint stood between them and the bridge. And beyond it, more mercenaries were waiting. Heavy footsteps echoed, the sound of weapons being readied. Dax tightened his grip on his rifle. No turning back now. Veros activated his wrist-mounted holo-device. A tactical layout of the corridor flickered to life. A direct assault was risky. But if they moved fast enough, they could punch through before Ragos locked them out completely. "On my mark," Veros said. Dax took position behind a steel column. His pulse pounded. 3. The mercenaries raised their weapons, their helmets glowing with targeting data. 2. Dax exhaled, steadying himself. 1. Veros moved first. With a fluid, brutal efficiency, he charged forward, firing precise shots, disabling shields, forcing enemies into cover. Dax followed, using the chaos to flank left, firing into exposed gaps in their armor. One enemy dropped, then another. A mercenary lunged. Dax spun, ducked under the attack, and drove his rifle butt into the man's visor. The enemy crumpled. The remaining soldiers tried to retreat, but Veros was already there. A single devastating strike to the leader's throat. The mercenary gasped, collapsed. The battle was over in seconds. Dax stepped over the fallen, breathing heavily. That was the easy part. Veros motioned to the final door. The bridge was just beyond it. But before they could reach it, the intercom crackled again. "Enough," Ragos growled. Then, a deafening explosion rocked the ship. Dax was thrown to the ground as emergency sirens screamed. The bridge doors sealed shut. Dax looked up, eyes widening in horror. The ship was accelerating, straight toward a massive gravitational field. Veros's expression darkened. "He's going to crash us." Ragos's voice dripped with malice. "If I can't have this ship, then neither will you." The final move. Veros acted fast. He knelt by a fallen mercenary and yanked a command access card from his belt. "Get to that terminal," he ordered Dax, tossing him the card. "We're cutting Ragos out of the system." Dax didn't hesitate. He sprinted to the emergency override console, swiped the card. "Access is guaranteed." Ragos's voice snarled over the intercom. "What?" Veros stepped toward the bridge doors, his holo device glowing. "You wanted control, Ragos. Then let me show you what real control looks like." With a single command, power surged through the ship. The emergency doors slammed open. Veros strode in, plasma pistol raised. And there, standing at the command station, was Ragos himself. The former warlord turned, eyes burning with rage. He wasn't wearing a helmet now, his scared face twisted in fury. "You've lost," Veros said simply. Ragos lunged, drawing a blade from his side. But Veros was faster. A single, precise shot. The plasma bolt struck Ragos in the chest. His body jerked back, crashing against the command panel. Dax stepped in, aiming his rifle, but it wasn't necessary. Ragos slumped forward, his breathing ragged. Defeated. The ship stabilized. The deadly course into the gravity field was aborted. Silence. Then, a new sound. The comm system crackled. A voice, not Ragos's this time. "This is Captain Lauren of the Terran fleet. We have your signal. Hold position. Reinforcements inbound." Dax grinned. They made it. Veros holstered his pistol, stepping toward the dying warlord. "You played your last game, Ragos." The warlord coughed, blood on his lips. He laughed bitterly. "You think this ends here?" His voice was weak but defiant. "You're wrong." Veros tilted his head. "We'll see." Then, without another word, he turned away. Epilogue. The aftermath. Hours later, the Terran fleet secured the ship. The hostages were rescued. The remaining mercenaries captured. Dax stood by a viewport, watching as the massive warships loomed outside. A presence moved beside him. Veros, his gaze distant. "You think Ragos was telling the truth?" Dax asked. "That this isn't over?" Veros exhaled. "Men like him always have a backup plan." Dax considered that, then smirked. "Then I guess we'll just have to be ready." Veros gave him a rare, small smile. "Yes, we will." Outside, the Terran fleet stood as an unbreakable wall against the darkness. Because no matter the enemy, no matter the war, humanity never backs down. The end.